you so much, Elle. It's always very humbling to have somebody speak about you like that. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm very, very honored to be friends with Elle. I gotta move that. As well as all of the other authors. There are 6 authors here this evening, and there are 4 more that couldn't make it in this book. This is our biggest book yet, with 10 stories. It is called Volume 2, and there might be a little bit of confusion about that because there's actually 3 books. So the first book is Daring to Share, 8 Brave Souls Sharing Their Authentic Road Trip, and it's their stories of From There to Here. So there are 8 stories in that one. Then Volume 2 is the one that you're receiving tonight and that we're launching for the first time. You are the receivers of the first books. And there are 10 stories. And somewhere along the line, I met some wonderful women in recovery in Kelowna at the Care Support Society. They all wanted to, one of their dreams was to become writers. And so we created this book for them. So because I already had started Volume 2 and had named it and everything, we decided to call that Special Edition 2019. And it's very appropriately titled because they are very special people. I just want to thank everybody for coming here. This is a beautiful group of people. I've already spoken to some of you and connected. There are many faces that I know, but also many that I don't and that I've just met this evening. And I really am greatly honored that you've taken the time to come here, because I know it's not easy. Once we get settled into our houses after a day's work, it's nice to just hibernate a little bit, especially in the darkness now. So thank you for coming out. Thank you in particular to my beautiful friends and business partners, John DeFreitas and Scott DeFreitas Graff. They have been by my side without me even asking for the last 3 years. So what's really important about, I'm not going to talk long because I really want to get to the authors. But I do want to share a little bit for people who don't know much about Daring to Share, about what it's really all about, right to the, with all the intricacies of it. The thing about Daring to Share is that at this point, we've been doing this for 3 years. The first book was launched last year, but Scott and I and John did events for 2 years before that here on Oceanside. And we don't make any money. We do this we do this literally because we really believe in it. We believe in-person connection and in people sharing their stories. So what's really important is that we don't want you to think that sharing your story means that you have had to go through some great blatant adversity in your life. Sharing your story, it's when you think about that, you think about writing a story in a book or in a journal or any way like that. Or you think about it as somebody sharing a story and like I could be sharing a story with Anne, sitting around a campfire. That's really how we started the whole movement, didn't we? It was about that we wanted in-person connection rather because we could feel that social media was taking over our lives. So we really wanted to inspire that in-person connection. But Daring to Share is all about sharing stories within conversation as well. So I'm an authentic leadership conversation facilitator. I was a authenticity coach for 12 years, and I was going to retire 3 years ago. I moved to the island. I met John and Scott, and apparently I'm really not very good at retiring at all. So what I found out about that, what I discovered about myself is that there's no way that I can live my life without some kind of purpose or meaning or to be of service. I have great clarity that now is my time to be of service to others. And so without me even realizing it, I literally was sitting around with John and Scott and we decided to do these storytelling events because I had started having conversations with people and I was like, people have amazing stories. Like, we need to share them because we're not understanding people. We don't know who they are. We're just walking around saying, hi, how are you? How's the weather? But we don't know each other. And so it became very clear to me that we have stories. I would sit in coffee shops and people, strangers, would start talking to me and sharing these amazing, amazing things that they've gone through in their life. And there was a feeling of connection within that. There's camaraderie. There's a feeling of belonging, of being loved because someone wants to listen to your story. Someone actually wants to connect with you and listen to even like the worst parts of your life, the ones that are not so complimentary, as well as the ones that we celebrate. So that's how it all started. I'm not really actually sure anymore what came first, the book or the events. I honestly can't even remember. But what has transpired since then is something called the movement. And so that happened with the second book, the special edition book, when I worked with these women in recovery. And I realized that those women in recovery were managing a lot of shame and blame, and their recovery was really more about getting over trauma than addiction. And once I realized that, it was very clear to me that they're no different than I am. Because we all have some form of trauma within us. And it may be just a little wee bit, like mine is my relationship with my mother. It's in the first book. You got to buy it to read it. But it's about that. It's not like I wasn't 5 years old and I wasn't raped. But for me, it was just as traumatic. And it was important for me to work through that emotional trauma and get to the other side. And what was really more important was that if I could find just one person to sit down with and share that with somebody without them judging me and not, I wouldn't feel the stigma and exclusion that people feel. People like people who are living on the street, who are in addiction, who we walk by and we don't even look at. And I remember not long ago when I was writing the second book, the special edition book, I actually went down to downtown Kelowna, and there was a woman sitting there, and I sat down with her. She was very skeptical of why I would be sitting with her. And we started having a conversation. And she asked me why. Why would I sit there with her? And I gave her a coffee. And she was extraordinarily intelligent and articulate. And we started talking about connection and what that meant to her. And I asked her, what is the worst part about living on the street? And she said, well, some people think that I'm starving all day long and that I have no place to sleep, of course, and she was homeless, living on the street. But she said, I can work all that out. I have people give me food all day long. There are places in Kelowna and places all over the world where you can go and get free food. But she said the worst part about being homeless and being on the street is when people walk by me and they turn their eyes the other way. Or they see me up ahead and they cross the street. And I asked her, how does that make you feel? And she said, disconnected. She was very clear about that. So there are people living in this world, not just homeless. There are probably some people right here in this room that at some point in your life, and maybe even now, you're feeling very emotionally disconnected. And that, people are dying an emotional death because of that emotional disconnection. And so how does that happen? It often happens just from a perception of what someone else thinks about us. So what other people think our story is. So what has happened with Daring to Share is that we have moved into a movement of sharing our stories, but also inspiring people to listen to those stories. So when we listen to someone else's story, we suddenly are filling in the gaps with the truth. When we don't listen to somebody's story, we fill in the gaps with our perception. And when we fill it in with perception, it's usually not the truth. And then what happens is we create judgment, and then we create stigma from that, and we create exclusivity. And there are people that are sitting at home, like on Facebook and Instagram or on their phones, and they see all these people and these little tribes that they're calling now. So when you see somebody in a tribe, this is my tribe, as soon as you see that, if you're not part of the tribe, then you're outside of the tribe, and there's a feeling of exclusivity. And it's a subconscious sort of thing, and it can really fester away inside of us, right? I see a lot of heads nodding like this, so that's good, because I want you to resonate with that. It's really important that sharing your story, that you also take the time then to ask somebody for their story. So those feelings of, when we have feelings of, I've had them, like I'm far from perfect. I can probably go to judgment once a day. Then I call Scott and I'm like, duh, 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 duh. But he's like, calm down. So, but it's because someone's maybe said something to me, or I've heard something, and my ego gets going, and I create a perception about somebody. And that's when I know now to slow down and really think about, like, what is that perception true? And how will I find out? The only way I'll find out is if I ask. So to ask somebody to share whatever it is that I'm perceiving, to gain clarity about it so that I understand it. And what happens is when you ask people for their story and you listen, then suddenly you understand them. And from understanding, you create compassion. And from compassion, there's love. So you don't necessarily need to believe what they do or what they say, or be in line with what they do or what they say, but at least you'll have some compassion, and with that there's acceptance. Does that make sense? Yeah. So just that's what we want you to know, is that Daring to Share is not just about us standing up here sharing a story. It is about writing a story. It is about sharing stories like this. But the movement piece of it is about treating each other as human beings. So my latest thing that I like to tell myself is, as a human being, I have a moral and ethical responsibility to find out what people's stories are so that I can understand them, have compassion for them, and then make my decisions around whatever that is that's going on. So I urge you, as the movement part of Daring to Share, because we do call ourselves Daring to Share, the book, the event, the movement. And the movement piece is, I ask you just one thing, is to go home and every day have an uncomfortable conversation with somebody. Just one uncomfortable conversation. It doesn't have to be a long one. It can be a little one. It can be with your children, with your spouse. You know when you get pissed off with your spouse? Or your partner? I do all the time. I have a lovely husband. He's got Parkinson's. He frustrates the hell out of me sometimes. And as much as that sounds horrible because he's not a well person, there are times when I do get frustrated because I've got a lot to do and I get tired, but I just slow myself down and I sit down and I ask him, how are you feeling right now? Let's talk about this. So it's about the uncomfortable conversation. And that is what Daring to Share is. Because I want to be able to understand him so that I can have compassion for him. I'll still call him on his shit, by the way. But at least we can understand each other. So if I'm frustrated, he's not intending to frustrate me. So it's about, finding out the whole story. And then we can move forward with compassion and love. So that's the one thing I'm going to dare you to do, is to go home and once a day have an uncomfortable conversation.